Welcome to the Workplace Savings and Benefits webinar on tackling financial well-being in the workplace, an event which we are holding in association with Wealth at Work. My name is Jonathan Stapleton. I'm the editor of WSB. COVID-19 has brought on many worries, which has had a direct effect on employee financial well-being, with many feeling greater levels of anxiety. Learning how to manage on a reduced income is crucial during these uncertain times, especially if employees are facing a fall in their overall household income due to either themselves or a partner facing reduced work or redundancy. This webinar will ask how much has COVID-19 impacted the financial well-being of employees and discuss both what employees can do in this situation and how employers can help through the provision of financial education and guidance. It will also look at the best ways to communicate financial well-being to staff at the current time, as well as look at the particular issues faced by people approaching retirement. I'm delighted to be joined by two expert panelists to take us through the issues. Jonathan Watts-Ley, Director at Wealth at Work, and Laurie Davis, Reward Specialist at Hyde Housing. Now, just to remind you, this is an interactive webinar, so please do send us your questions using the Ask a Question box on your screen. I'll put as many of those as possible to our speakers, so please do ask away. Now, before we begin, Jonathan and Laurie, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do, please? Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Jonathan Watts-Ley, Director at Wealth at Work. So we provide financial education and financial wellness strategies to around 450 organisations, both in the private and public sector. And some of these are full financial well-being strategies, whereas others concentrate on certain financial issues that employees or groups of employees may face. So, for example, people coming up to retirement, or when there's a major change in benefits, such as a DB pension closure, for example. We have a lot of interventions through everything from seminars to online tools, financial health checks, helplines, which have actually grown a lot in recent times, and also regulated advice.
Thank you very much indeed. Laurie.
Hi, my name is Laurie Davis. I am the Reward Specialist at the Hyde Group. We are a housing association based in mainly London and the South East. One of my responsibilities is managing the wellbeing strategy and programme that we have in Hyde, which we developed and launched in about 2015. One of the pillars we have in our programme is obviously financial wellbeing. So we've been looking at sort of different benefits and programmes over the years to support our employees. I've actually worked with Wealth for the last couple of years too.
Thank you very much indeed. Just to set the scene, just to ask each of you, to what extent has COVID-19 impacted the financial well-being of employees? Jonathan, sorry, let's start with that, with you on that. Sorry, thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that the key thing is that we know a lot of people have got reduced household income, so that's been a real driver, and it's been a really important that a lot of employers have actually realised that it's household income that needs to be considered rather than necessarily just the individual income of maybe their employee, because there are lots of situations out there where, of course, an employee of that employer, they actually may still be earning their full salary. They haven't been furloughed. They haven't been put on short hours. Clearly, they haven't been made redundant. But of course, somebody in their household may be facing those sorts of situations, so that their household income goes down, and so therefore the household can get into quite a tight situation in terms of general money management, managing debts, and also understanding what's going on out there as well. So of course there has been government initiatives during the COVID period to try and help people, so things like mortgage holidays, things like non-evictions for people that are renting if they're struggling to pay the rent. So all those sorts of things have really grown in terms of people needing to be aware of them. And I think a lot of employers have stepped up to a lot of those issues. I'm sure there's many that haven't, but certainly we've seen a lot that have.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Jonathan. Laurie, do you agree with that? Have you seen sort of COVID has had a bigger impact on employees?
Definitely, and I think the sort of key thing to remember is everyone, especially in this year, is in very different situations and circumstances. From sort of Hyde's point of view, for our employees, we've had limited people who have been furloughed or on reduced hours or anything like that. So from our employee side, there isn't that necessarily direct financial impact due to COVID. However, as Jonathan has said, we're very aware that people's family situations can really impact their financial well-being. So be it partners being made redundant or having reduced salary. But what we've also seen is, given that we know a lot of the under 25s have been the most likely to be furloughed or losing jobs, we've seen circumstances where people are having to find additional finances for their sort of older children, having to look to support them sort of during this year as well. I think also in some cases we've had situations where people might actually be sort of better off financially, given costs that a lot of people have saved during having to travel and commute, can be quite a big chunk of money for a lot of people. But again, conscious that isn't the majority of people being in a better situation. We're saying on one hand, you're not having to commute and saving thousands on the rail fare, but if you've got the whole family working at home, those utility costs are definitely going to be increasing. And I think for us, it's quite difficult to necessarily know, the impact on individuals. I think there still seems to be quite a bit of a stigma around people talking about their financial well-being, especially if they're struggling or they're having issues. So to actually discuss that with manager or coming forward to their employer. So I think as an employer, just being aware that we do know that a lot of people will be suffering at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Laurie. And just sort of, how have you sort of stepped up at Hyde to address some of these challenges? What have you been doing? And sort of, I know you've been sort of put a program in place since what 2015, but what extra have you been doing as a result?
So for us, it's really just, first and foremost, was reminding employees of what we do have on offer, and the sort of the tools and the benefits that are available to them sort of during this time. I mean, like most organisations, we have an employee assistance programme, and reminding people that it's not just necessarily lifestyle issues that people can contact the EAP and have support with. They do support on financial issues such as managing debts, home buying, renting, bankruptcy, those sort of things. And again, just sort of pointing people into the direction of where they can get advice and they can get support. There's a lot of free sites out there, money service advice, as well as what we offer as an employer in terms of our flexible benefits, reminding people of what we do have on offer there, where people can make the salary sacrifice savings, but also getting those corporate rates on some insurance products, spreading out the cost, and just making sure that we're doing as much communication as we can, really. We've also, end of last year, we did with Wealth at Work, we ran some education seminars in terms of financial well-being, and looking at sort of the different aspects of starting to plan for retirement, budgeting, managing your debt. So working with them there. One of the sort of new initiatives that we did launch this year was working with Headspace, which is generally a mindfulness app, but they do have a mindful money sort of section as well to help people managing financial stress. Some sort of money talks and seminars on there.
Thank you very much indeed, Laurie. Bringing you in, Jonathan, as sort of on the question of how employers can help. I mean, Laurie's been talking about the importance of communication and also making people aware of the benefits that are already there, as well as obviously the financial education seminars themselves. What's your perspective? How can employers help from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the general area of money management, it's ensuring that employees understand not only the key things that they should think about in terms of how their expenditure, but also understanding where they can go to get that help. So there's a lot of expenses that most people will have, so ranging from things like utility bills through to car insurance, home insurance, broadband, where we know that people will probably get a better deal if they shop around. So I think that the first thing always for employees to understand is well, what is the best way to do that? I mean, the classic one that we see so often is things like car and home insurance renewal. Well, particularly with car insurance renewal, the chances are you will get a better deal elsewhere, because it's just the way the car insurance industry works. And of course, that could be a few £100 saving that you could make. So you then add that up across utility bills, broadband, etc. All of a sudden, you can see that there could be quite a significant saving for people, certainly over a period of a year. And then if you add across that some of the benefits that may be on offer. And sorry, Laurie, I got cut off. So forgive me, stop me if you've already said this. But things like discount vouchers. So many employers have 5% off the weekly shop at Tesco's or Sainsbury's or whatever it might be. And yet, often when we go into organisations and we look at the take up of those vouchers, often it's single digit. It'd be like 5, 6, 7% of people that do that. So this whole range of combination of things that people could look at from a cost perspective that could help them save money. I think the other thing as well, and particularly in the current climate, is getting people to understand debt and the cost of debt and how debt compounds up and what options that they may have to help reduce that debt. And part of that is around getting people to understand the difference between what we often term as good debt and bad debt. So good debt is something like a mortgage, because clearly most people cannot go out and just buy a house. So if you want to own your own home, then you have to have a mortgage. But making sure clearly that they're reviewing rates and they've got a competitive deal from time to time. But bad debt is all those loans and credit cards where there tends to be a very, very high APR rate. And often people don't understand how that can compound up. But there are things that people can do. I mean, things like, credit card debt consolidation, often to a new card that may give an interest-free period for 6 months or so. I mean, these deals come out all of the time. So there's lots of ways that people can manage their monthly budget better. It's just making sure they understand what those things are, or what the key things are, and where they can go for help. So that is often a cornerstone of good financial well-being, is getting down to the real practicalities. And in terms of how that might be delivered, that could be a whole range of things. I know Laurie mentioned seminars. It could be webcast. It could be through a helpline. So there's a whole range of interventions, if you like, that can be provided to employees.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Jonathan. And on that note, we've got lots of questions coming in. I'll try and address some of them with my next one to you both. And I think the interesting question here is where to start with all of this. I mean, you've talked about lots of different things to sort of explain to employees. As one of our questioners said, not everybody has strong numeracy skills and may be challenged with some of this. Where do you actually start as an employer when putting a program in place? What is that first step? Laurie, would you sort of like to take that one?
Yeah.
Sorry.
And again, I think again, you need to realise, we need to realise that, all employees are different. There will be people, in terms of financial well-being, there will be people who have sort of different needs, different worries, and as I said, different levels of, necessarily understanding, even where they need to look at. I think for us, we've tried to make sure that we've got as many resources as possible to address, the different things that people might need to look at. We've got our intranet page with a dedicated site for wellbeing and sort of a dedicated page for financial wellbeing. So there we've sort of listed all of the resources and all of the things that might be applicable to people. I think for us, a good place to start is either the EAP or Money Advice Service, which does have a helpline. Especially if it's for people that aren't really sure sort of where to start. You've got those sort of dedicated support services for people, and then just making sure that there's constant communication for people to think about. So I know Jonathan mentioned the discount site and vouchers. We have a sort of an employee discount site where we do offer discounts for your local weekly food shop or insurances, and where people can get a discount. So just reminding people that there are these things out here to help them make these sort of everyday savings. Communication is key. It needs to be sort of bite-sized chunks for people to understand and reminders about what is out there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lloyd. Jonathan, do you agree sort of the sort of flagging up support services as a sort of first step, followed by those things that's already in place?
Yeah, I mean, there are actually a number of ways that this can be done, and with different employers, we kind of operate in a slightly different way. I mean, some will go right back to almost like the research stage, where they will do an employee survey, they will run focus groups and try and get a feel as to what are the issues within the workforce, or even in different cohorts of the workforce, depending on maybe age, or depending on salary range or grade, and because that might be influenced by the sort of benefits they get as well. So some go almost back to right to the beginning and move from there. Others will jump in a bit further down the road. So, for example, we have something called the financial health check, which basically has 4 subject areas. It has debt, it has savings, it has retirement, and it has personal protection, so insurances, things like that. And it allows the individual to jump in. So if they're a bit concerned about debt, they can jump in, and it's an interactive online service where certain questions will be asked of them, and at the end of that online questioning process, certain resources will be available, and those resources can differ depending on what the requirement is from the employer. But basically, it could be, as Laurie said, it could be a sort of bite-sized chunk animation, for example. So it just might be, here's a 3-minute, very simple, very high-level animation on things to think about in terms of managing your debt. Equally, it could be, if you're concerned and want to have a general chat, call this helpline. If you're really in debt, and things are really about to go, you're going to get the bailiffs around any moment, then actually here's a link off to the national debt line, because you've got serious things that you're going to have to resolve. So what it means is that it's almost becomes self-selection. So as long as the resources are there and the link offs are there, it almost becomes self-selection. So somebody who's in that situation can go, right, okay, that's what I need to know. But actually, they've got there through a process that's probably taken 10 minutes. Whereas, if someone's sat at work or working from home, sat there thinking, I am seriously worried. What can I do? Where can I go? Then they could A, spend a lot of time worrying about it, but B, not really know where to go, or they might search online and not really come up with any conclusion. But it could also work the other way as well. I mean, we're talking about a lot of the, if you like, the negative side of the impact on finances of COVID. But of course, for some people, financially, it's been quite positive, because they've been earning the same salary. And yet, of course, they've not been allowed to go out and spend it on holidays or in restaurants, pubs, or whatever else. So the other side of that coin is people also want help, saying, well, I've now got excess money. What should I do with that money? So again, then it's all around, well, do people understand that they can put money in ISAs and it will grow tax free? Do they understand that they can get tax free returns from things like national savings? So there's a number of things that people won't necessarily know about, but you can give them in a bite-sized chunk that will take 10 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. And a few more questions coming in. I know you've both mentioned handing off to other organisations such as the Money Advice Service or Step Change. Our question are sort of to what extent should employers be handing over to outside organisations when their staff sort of effectively got issues? How comfortable can employers be in doing that, and perhaps do you need sort of advice, financial advice instead? Jonathan, sort of lots in that question. Can I go to you first with that?
Yeah, so I wouldn't suggest that people are just handed off straight away. I think there is a process here. So if you're putting in place a financial wellbeing strategy, really a financial wellbeing strategy isn't, I don't know, having a list of links on your intranet site that's just going to hand somebody off to third parties. So I think I'm not sure that will be particularly helpful. So what is important is there's a process that people can go through. So similar to what I just described, where actually resources are being put in place that will actually probably help 95% of the employee base anyway. So that could be anything from watching a video to using a calculator to going on a seminar, whether that be online or maybe in due course face to face, and that will a general helpline that again we would provide as part of the financial wellbeing strategy. So that's going to answer most questions for most people. Now, a few of them will want to go on and take regulated financial advice, particularly people coming up to retirement. But there may be those people that, as I say, with debt, for example, that are really going to have the bailiffs coming round tomorrow. That's their fear, and so they've really got to jump on that. So that's when it is important that actually there is a third-party handoff there where they can go and get support. But I certainly wouldn't say, you've got a well-crafted strategies, all you've got is a load of handoffs to third parties.
Yeah, Laurie, you're nodding there. Would you agree with that approach?
Definitely, and I think if as offering support as an employer, it is it shouldn't just be fine. You've got some problems. Here's a number. It is discussing with the employee and having, I was going to say face to face, but some sort of conversation. Especially with the education financial seminars, webinars last year that we had in place. That I think that's really useful. To have people together, learning from sort of the colleagues in the room or on the webinar and having those discussions. We found when we were running these with Wealth at Work that there was, so much that came out that a lot of people hadn't even thought about. So just having those discussions with colleagues and obviously the sort of presenters in the room and the experts, and being able to have that sort of those sessions where you're getting the education, but then going on to have sort of one-on-one guidance if that is what was required, which I think we found for most people that is sort of what they need to discuss their individual needs, and then go on to any sort of regulated advice if required.
Thank you very much indeed, Laurie. And that brings us neatly on to sort of how best to design a sort of more formal wellbeing program. Jonathan, obviously that may well have changed over the past year with the lockdown and such like, but sort of what sort of things do you put into sort of your offering? Seminars, webinars, one-to-one? Does video versus say audio work best? How do you find sort of what do you find works best?
Yeah, so I think the point that Laurie's just made is a really important one, actually, as a general point, is that if you get people engaged in a subject area and this conversation with colleagues as well in things like seminars, you find there's a real richness of debate, and even with the benefit provision that the employer might offer, somebody will say something and the person go, oh, I didn't know we do that. How does that work then? And and then when you get into more general financial matters, you realise that people's understanding often is often quite superficial, really, or in fact wrong sometimes. So that they're under a misapprehension. But that often raises lots of thoughts, things, one of the most common pieces of feedback we get in seminars, for example, whether they're online or face-to-face, is people saying, why has no one ever told me this before? I didn't know this before. But what you find is that it's almost like, I don't know what I don't know. So once they've become aware of certain issues or certain things that perhaps they should be taking action on, then they want to follow through on that. So Laurie's point about then often they want to have a one-to-one session, so a guidance session, is where things like helplines then become really, really important. And those guidance sessions are not regulated advice. They're not it's not with a regulated advisor who's going to be making some sort of recommendation. It's really just talking through and saying, look, given your personal situation, some of the things that you might want to think about is X, Y, and Z. But of course, a result of that could be that ultimately they do want to go and get regulated advice or whatever it might be. So I think the point that Laurie makes about the process of, let's say, seminar to helpline to regulated advice for those who need it is really a good one. But mixed in with all of that, there are things that have to be considered. So budgeting tools. Often people find if an idea has been discussed, for example, in a seminar, and a budgeting tool has been demonstrated, then for that individual to go back to maybe their company intranet site and play around with that budgeting tool, and they might have some other resources around it, so it might have some little video clips or little animations, etc. All of those sorts of things can really, really help. So we've had some clients who have really focused on that video piece and built it into libraries effectively. So they've been doing digital nudges every month saying, oh, the next subject area we're going to cover is debt. And the first video on debt is, let's talk about credit card debt. And it's like a 3-minute video on credit card debt. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, they're pushing another one out and going, we're still on debt, but this time it's about mortgages, and 3 or 4 weeks later, we're still on debt, but this time it's about payday loans. And then then they might say, right, now we're going on to savings. The first video this month is about ISAs and how they work, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, it might be, it's now about national savings and how they work. So you can sort of build up, you can have these constant digital nudges, and then of course all those videos that are pumped out, very short, bite-sized chunks, but then of course they can be stored on a microsite, which can have other additional resources on, can have things like financial news feeds. So it's as broad or as big as you want to make it, really. The only other point I would make is that some organisations also really want to segment down, not just based on things like grade of people, but also working environment. So you can imagine the deliverable to somebody who works in a head office is somewhat easier than the deliverable to somebody who works an 8-hour shift, for example, in a factory. So again, some of those mechanisms need to account for people's working environments.
Thank you, Jonathan. Lots of questions coming in. Laurie, can I put one to you? The question has been quite specific in this particular instance. So the question is, has COVID brought into sharper focus the need for a will or lasting power of attorney service? Have you seen any interest? Can I broaden that out a little bit to ask you more broadly whether you've seen a sort of drive, increased take-up of certain benefits on the financial side versus others?
We have definitely. We had our flexible benefit enrolment window was end of last year, and we've seen, I mean, as you would expect, we have some discounted restaurant cards, which has decreased given that restaurants not even sure when they're going to be open. I think it's June now. But we have seen that increase in the more of the sort of the health and the insurance type benefits. So we have seen an increase in will writing. We do offer discounted will that can be spread across the 12 months. So we have seen an increase in that. We've seen an increase in critical illness cover, as well as people, flexing their own life insurance and partner life insurance. So a little bit morbid, but I think, this year is really, started to get people to think about their health and about the future, estate planning. So I think, we were expecting those benefits to have an increase, and we've just seen sort of last month that has been. I mean, definitely with employees asking us when the window was open, sort of us going around communicating the different benefits. They were the sort of the benefits that people wanted to hear about and query.
Thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely great. A quick one here, Jonathan. A specific one, but I think you'll be able to answer it. Is there a tax charge for this sort of financial wellbeing guidance?
No. So as long as as long as it's effectively available to everyone, and effectively it's generic, albeit it might be tailored to the benefits that you offer as an employer, then companies have asked this many times. In fact, they have asked HMRC, and I'm not aware that the HMRC has ever gone back to any of them saying that there's a benefit in kind. That's not to say, of course, that at some point they wouldn't say that, but I'm simply not aware. And I say we work with a lot of organisations, and I'm not aware that has ever been the case. There is, of course, on the pension side, there are two allowances for pension advice, because when you get into advice, then of course that is very personalised to the individual, but most organisations that we work with would not pay for the advice for the individual. So they would want, they would do the due diligence on us for our financial advice arm to make sure that they were happy with it, but they would not actually pay for that advice. It would be down to the employee to pay for it, clearly out of net pay. So there wouldn't be an issue there. But there are some allowances on that pension side. I mean, I'm happy to go into detail later if possible, because there's two different types actually. But broadly speaking, with one of them, you can have £500 withdrawn from the pension in 3 different financial years, up to £1,500, and it's paid for by the pension. But it's not treated as an unauthorised withdrawal from the pension. And the employer can actually pay up to £500 also in addition to that for pension advice, and you can actually double up on that. So in 1 year you could effectively get £1,000 worth of advice without any tax charge. But if somebody wants to know more details on how that actually works, then probably best to contact me.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan, for that. And on that point, we've got another question here with regards to do you have any thoughts for late financial bloomers, and what people need to focus on there? I'm going to add a little bit to that question and sort of ask if COVID has had any sort of specific impacts on the finances of people coming up to retirement. I presume that sort of group that our question was meaning by late financial bloomers. So people coming up to retirement, are there any particular issues at the moment there, Jonathan, and any sort of particular impact from COVID?
Yeah, in fact, there's quite a lot of data on this area done by a number of organisations. But broadly speaking, you can break it down into 3 parts. So the first group are those people that effectively have been made redundant. They're over the age of 55, so they can withdraw their pension. And even though they had no intention of retiring, effectively redundancy as in essence meant forced retirement, or certainly forced retirement in the short term. There were some figures from I think it was LV, who was saying that in their research they were suggesting that maybe 150,000 people had been impacted by that. So of course, there's a lot of issues there. Is that if people are coming up to are being made redundant, and actually they are retiring, they are going to pull money out of their pension, but they're doing it, let's say, in their late 50s, then there's certainly things that they need to understand in terms of how long that money's got to last. Also tax implications as well. They might need to consider in that first year. So that's the first group. So we know some of that's been happening. The second group are people that are still in employment, but are suffering from reduced household income. But again, because they're aged over 55, they're aware that they could take money out of their pension to effectively supplement the income that they've got. So again, we know some people are doing that, but again, people need to be clear about understanding the implications of doing that, because of course it has implications not only in terms of running down their pension pot, but also in terms of the money purchase annual allowance as well, because they'll be restricted to the £4,000. So that's the second group. And then the third group are the people that have been impacted by a reduction in their pension pot value. So clearly people with DC pots. And again, there's some research out there. In fact, there's been YouGov polls on this as well, which shows that I think the YouGov poll said 13% of over 55s had a delayed retirement because they wanted to build back up their pension pot.
So lots to think about there, Jonathan. Thank you very much indeed. And another question from our audience here. How do you take a slightly different tack? How do you easily engage sort of bite-sized pieces of information in organisations with a diverse workforce who may not all have forms of company-provided IT, say in the manufacturing sector? Laurie, do you have any sort of thoughts on that one at all?
Yeah, so we have a direct labour force in our organisation who tend to all be based on the South Coast, and that's, I think, with all messages, that is the sort of the harder group to be able to communicate with. These guys aren't office based. They're not sat with their email and their computer, like our office based employees. What we found over the years is, and it has been really difficult in the last year, is that it has to be that sort of face-to-face engagement. We've just found, emails, sort of trying to do anything sort of virtually just doesn't really get the message through. So, this year excluded, we would go down, try and go and join sort of like quarterly team meetings to get across sort of key messages. When we did run the sort of financial education seminars, we did do separate ones for those groups of employees. So mainly we had split that into sort of career stage, but then did a sort of a separate session for those employees. And I don't think I have a sort of a magic answer, because I think it's always going to be difficult to get messages across to separate workforces who work so differently to the rest. But I think it just has to be that face-to-face engaging with line managers to help get messages down to the workforce that we found to be most successful.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Laurie. Jonathan, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think Laurie's absolutely right, and I think that the hybrid model really is one of the things that has really come to the fore with people that work in, for example, manufacturing environments, or environments where they're just not in an office. So it could be salespeople on the road or whatever. But one of the things that we've seen quite a change in is the acceptance now. So the question that's been asked here about where people don't have work devices, they don't have PCs or phones. One of the key things that I've seen that's changed now is there's an acceptance in a lot of businesses who have a workforce where they don't have the employees' tech. There is just an acceptance that 99% of them will have their own devices, whether that be a mobile or a laptop or an iPad or whatever. So what's really growing for those people is not only the acceptance that they have those devices, albeit they're their personal ones, but it's being combined with launching and then nudging people to certain resources. So, for example, in a manufacturing site, we may create a big launch in that site. So, you know, it might be posters in the staff rooms. If they've got TV screens, it could be digital messages going around on those TV screens on site. There could be a briefing by the production manager or whoever's in charge of a certain shift. So basically, noise is being created about, hey, there's something here new for you that could help you as an employee, even down to put in messages on the packaging that people get within the staff canteens on their sandwiches or box of salad or whatever else they buy. So some real good innovation in building the awareness. But of course, as well as the briefings that the line manager might do, and the messaging that's on posters or TV screens or whatever, it's basically saying, hey, here's a URL. Put it in your phone or whatever you've got with you, and there's some resources for you, and we will be sending you through notifications of new things every month. So all of a sudden you're setting an expectation of stuff that's going to come through that might be helpful. So that combined with, as Laurie said, you know, the face-to-face piece seems to be the direction of travel. But to answer the basic question, that the question I had is, a lot of companies now are going, it doesn't matter that they don't have staff equipment, they will have their own. So just work with that.
Thank you very much indeed. Lots more questions coming in. Perhaps we can take some of these quickly. Has there been a change in demand for corporate ISAs as a result of COVID? Is this something employers should revisit? I'm not sure if either of you are able to sort of answer that. Jonathan, do you from speaking to your clients, do you sense there's been a change in the sort of demand for corporate ISAs?
Yeah, I must admit I haven't got any data on this. I couldn't substantiate this in any way. I've not really heard much about it. I think the thing with corporate ISAs is you know, quite a few years ago now they were launched with great fanfare, and in most examples that we came across, take up had been very, very low, and actually that was part of the reason why they wanted organizations like us going in to try and say, look, we think it's because people don't really understand how these things work and what they should be doing. So when there were interventions, and some of that uptake did increase, but it is also fair to say that a lot of the suppliers in that market just withdrew from the market because they weren't making enough from it. So whilst I know there are actually some new players coming into the market, some of the new startups looking at that area again, I couldn't honestly say what the take up is because I've not got any real data from that.
No, thank you very much, Jonathan. Laurie, I presume you don't offer a corporate ISA at Hyde?
No, we were actually one of the examples that Jonathan talked about. We did implement it quite a few years ago now through our flexible benefit scheme, but take up was extremely low. And yeah, it was withdrawn, but we haven't, it's not something we've been looking at or considering ourselves, no.
Thank you both very much. On the point of take up, another question here, what sort of take up should we expect from a financial wellbeing program, and are there certain elements that get greater take up than others? I'm sure that's a very organization specific question, depends on your workforce and how you promote it and so forth, but Jonathan, is sort of what do you see as sort of an average take up, if there's such a thing as average in these things?
Well, what I would say is the question is a really, really important question, because I would say that for any financial wellbeing strategy that's put into place, it should be measured, and there's a number of ways that you can measure it, and I'd be here for the next hour if I was to give you the full list, but just high level, it can be anything from take up of the interventions. So as Laurie said, you know, they ran seminars, and even though those seminars might be segmented to certain cohorts, so you know, people over 55 that are looking to retire, or people that have just joined the company, or could be more general because it could relate to, let's say, a flex window that's opening. So what is your audience, and how many of those people have actually taken it up? So attended that seminar, let's say. Next to that, you could say, okay, so all of the people that have attended the seminar, what did they think of the seminar? So for us, we have a 10-question, 5-point scale questionnaire that they have to complete. This is done whether it's they have an online seminar or face-to-face seminar. They have to complete that at the end. So straight away, we can get a ranking of on that 1 to 5 scale as to how they rate certain things in those 10 questions. They also have the opportunity to fill out freehand, so they could write any comment they want. And again, that's quite important because often you will see themes coming through, which can be surprising often to us as well as the employer. You can also look at things, of course, like if it's videos, you know, well, how many people watched the video? Did they watch it for the whole duration? You can then look at things like what was the take up of the helpline? What were the questions raised? Well, I mean, we normally categorize it into sort of high level categories. So what sort of issues were raised? You can look at the take up of the benefits, so the kind of before and after. So 10% of people took this benefit before intervention. 6 months down the road, it's now jumped to 20% or whatever it may be. And I mean, I could go on. There's endless ways to measure it, but the question is a really, really important one. Always measure, always understand what's having impact, and always understand therefore where you need to make adjustments. And you will get some surprises. There will be things that come through from your employees that you just will never think of.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. Laurie, how do you measure the success of your financial wellbeing program? Do you sort of use sort of a variety of those metrics?
Yeah, so I mean, it was mostly everything that Jonathan has said, you know, in terms of the sort of the education program, looking at you know, sort of take up rates of the seminars, you know, looking at those scores following the seminars, obviously take up of our flexible benefits, you know, usage of other services. We also have a sort of a wider all employee, you know, sort of engagement survey where we have a few sort of questions, not specifically on financial well-being, but well-being overall, which we also use to measure as well, looking at, you know, before and after after implementing any programs.
The other thing that I would add in as well, if I can, Jonathan, is programs, if they're run well and you're doing that measurement over time, they really build momentum. So you will find that after, and again, differs employer by employer, but broadly speaking, after, let's say, a couple of years of having a good, robust program, you will find that engagement levels go through the roof, in the sense that employees will start coming to the reward department and saying, hey, my colleagues had something and I haven't had it. So you often see this on retirement. We do a lot, you know, where people say age 50, a lot of employers will want us to start explaining to their staff what are the options they have for retirement, what are the generic upsides and downsides of those options, just so that even though they might not be retiring for another 10 years or whatever, they're just getting their head in the right space. And on things like that, you know, we've got employers who've been running those now for a couple of years or more, and if we're sending out effectively invitations to those sessions at age 50, we get feedback, and the employer gets feedback where if someone turns 50 and they haven't had their invitation, and the reason they haven't had it might be because just logistics really, and actually they're not going to get it until they're 50 in 3 months. But they will start calling the reward department and saying, hold on a minute, where's my seminar? I know I have a right to a seminar. And they literally see it as a right. So if you get this stuff right, you get absolutely the ultimate in engagement.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan. I'm afraid we're running towards the end of the time we have for our webinar today. But if I can ask you both just sort of your concluding thoughts or your key takeaways following our discussion. Laurie, sorry, I have to come to somebody first, but can I start with you on that, please?
No problem. I think, you know, everyone will say this has been a very difficult year, especially with wellbeing aspects for employees. I think it's really key to be aware that to really try and engage with employees to understand what issues they are facing. So I think to be mindful that, you know, not many people, you know, there's still that sort of stigma around financial health, that people may not be sort of eager to come forth and, you know, say that they're having issues. You know, financial well-being is so key. It affects all other types of mental well-being, productivity at work, especially when we've had a year like we have. I think it's just really important to make sure that it's very clear what you have in place as an employer, and to keep that communication constant, and engaging with employees about everything that you are offering as their employer. Again, making sure that you're aware that everyone is different, everyone will have different needs. Whether it might be that they have got those extra savings and what do they need to do with it, they're coming up to retirement, they haven't started planning for their pension, or could be more serious and suffering with bad debts, or facing bankruptcy. So I think just as an employer, it's really key to make sure that you have a financial wellbeing program that has support for all those different scenarios.
Laurie, thank you very much indeed. Jonathan.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything that Laurie said. I think that the only things I could add to that are think about push and pull strategies within your overall well-being strategy. So what I mean by that, what are the things that you want to push out as an organization? So if you look at something like retirement, you may say, well, for everyone who's aged 50 and above, or 55 and above, whatever it might be, we want to push stuff out because we know these people need to make decisions, and if they get those decisions wrong, then they could pay dearly for those. On the other hand, have pull strategies. So if someone has got debt worries or debt problems, you don't really want to go out as an employer and say, oh, tap people on the shoulder saying, oh, by the way, have you got a debt problem? So that's where you just need to make sure people are aware that resources are available, and then they can pull those resources as and when they need them. So I think that push and pull strategy is really important. I think logistics is really important as well. So we touched on that earlier. So different working environments. So what is the delivery mechanism in those different working environments? I think tied to that is learning styles as well. We know different people have different learning styles. So is it a face-to-face seminar? Is it an online seminar? Is it a video? Is it a piece of animation? Is it a workbook? Is it a budgeting tool? Is it a helpline? So all those things should be considered. And then I think the last point, and I'm pleased whoever asked the question asked it, is measurement. Make sure you understand what you're trying to achieve and measure it.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's all we have time for in this webinar. All that remains for me to do is thank Wealth at Work's Jonathan Watts-Ley and Hyde Housing's Laurie Davis for taking part, and to say thank you to all of you for viewing. Please do join us for our next webinar again soon. Thank you very much indeed.